To the Interdisciplinary Committee on Linguistics, or ICAL's first invited lecture of the spring 2021 semester. So, as the chairman of ICAL, I really truly do believe that ICAL embodies the mission of ASU. We are a transdisciplinary group of linguists across the many schools of ASU, and we host talks, engage in outreach, and generally spread the good word about the awesomeness of linguistics to not just ASU, but to our community. And it's so great to see so many people from so many different places coming together for this talk. So our approaches are various, but as this talk might suggest, we are united in using language as a point from which to investigate profound questions concerning society and its organization. We're really excited to have the opportunity to host Professor Joseph Hill from the Rochester Institute of Technology today. I also want to mention that in just a few short weeks, on Friday, April 9th at 10 a.m., we will be hosting another exciting talk, this time from Professor Martin Haspelmath from the Max Planck Institution for Evolutionary Anthropology. We hope to see you there as well. Finally, we are super excited about the creation of iCall's listserv. Please do sign up, as it will be a great way to stay in the know about all of iCall's events and activities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay Patterson, who will formally introduce Professor Hill. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. It is really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joseph Hill. He is a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology in the Department of American Sign Language and Interpreting Education, as well as the director of the Deaf Studies Lab in the Center on Cultural and Language. He is the leading expert. He is definitely the leading expert in the field of socio-historical and linguistic aspects of African-American variety of American Sign Language, and the attitudes and the ideologies about signing varieties in the deaf community. His list of publications is extensive. He's authored 3 books. First one, Sign Language, The Structures and Contexts. That was published in 2019, and The Language Attitudes in the American Deaf Community. That was published in 2012. And thirdly, The Hidden Treasures of Black ASL, Its History and Structure, published in 2011. We are truly fortunate to have him here with us today. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Hill. Let me pin my screen. Thank you for inviting me for this presentation. I'm really feel honored to share my work with all the viewers here today about Black ASL. There's a book published back in 2011, and we know that people are still clueless about, one moment please, for the interpreter lost the spotlight. So it's good to know that we have these different options and resources that we're able to share with you now. I'm trying to look at the chat here, one second. So I just saw a message in the chat. I just also added a link there. There's a link to my faculty, the faculty website. In there, there's a list of different resources that really relates to Black ASL, and including the documentary that we did, Signing Black in America. And it's also now free on YouTube. So you can view that anytime. So we just wanted to, if you would like to support, you can purchase the DVD, and we encourage your places of employment, your universities to support this project by purchasing the DVD. And you can also include that with the team there and with your work, not only just sign language, but other work, for example. Now the book that we see here, so what is the point of Black ASL? And how did Black ASL come up when you look through history and moving fast forward to today? But now the importance is, and I really feel it's important to really emphasize. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, sign language is not universal. And I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, yeah, you can sign with someone from a different part of the country. No, it's not the same. ASL here in America is ASL here in America. But when you go to England, they have their own BSL. People are shocked to know that. If you go to Italy, they have theirs. So every country has their own way of signing. There's not in a good exact number of the different sign languages spoken throughout the world. There's no list, but there's an estimate of around 120. Some say there's 200. So that number is still up for debate. But how do we collect this data and identify these different areas? The methodology of that is unclear right now, but we do trust that here at Gallaudet University, the Gallaudet Press, they keep track of sign languages and emergences of sign language through their magazine. It's research-based, and there they count what they have. And so far, they have counted about 90 different sign languages in the world. Next slide, please. So now we know about sign language and how sign language is different throughout different areas. Now, one language that has diversity, or we like to say dialect variation, um, so it's not also common throughout every area. It's for a particular region. So through this work, you can see in the book that we published in 2001, there was a book published in 2001, in which really focused on 8 different cities. Excuse me, 8 different cities. And here you can see an example of some where we look at variety of sign language. And not just sign language, but the phrase and the sentence structure and the different things that we've noticed there. The simple sign as deaf from the ear to the mouth. Some sign from the ear to the mouth, and others may sign deaf from the mouth to the ear. A variation. So what does that mean? Does it mean that the sign is different? No, but you find those instances of people that live in certain areas that sign it a different way. So you may go to one place, they sign it different, and another state may sign it opposite. So for example, when you look at certain areas and when you look at language or the sentence structure and how that influences sign language, for example, I tend to sign deaf from the ear to the mouth. And then later, I switched it up from the mouth to the ear. And why is that? Sometimes they have connections with family, like if you have a deaf father, in the father's sign is near the forehead. Some people alter the sign to have that connection. Or a mother, their mother is deaf. So that connection with the deaf communities from the mother, so they flip the sign that way. So that was an interesting observation. Another sign that we noticed that was different, but it's the same sign. For example, birthday. We know the sign for birthday, but you see in Pennsylvania, they sign birthday by the ear. Or another state may sign birthday as if they're blowing out candles, or they have a birthday cap on. So when you notice the different nuances and variations of sign throughout the country, is there's a telephone or different apps. You can get free movies from Gallaudet University, from Gallaudet Press, which really shows, a lot of you can find on YouTube. There's different films that relates different books. There's a sign, excuse me, there's a book for What's Your Sign for Pizza? And that also really explains sign variation. Next slide, please. Now, the chronicle for this book in Hidden Treasures of Black ASL. So, and we also created a film with this, a corpus of film from Gallaudet University Press. They've helped produce this film. Now, this work is really important, and not because my team was doing this work, no, but the importance is because there is history. There is history that has been incorporated in this book, in the references that really enlighten and really have a spotlight on the deaf community and the history within the language that we speak. Now, with linguistics and studying signs, but also there's a film that relates to Black deaf people itself. And not many people have or produce films that really focus on Black deaf and Black sign language. There's other researchers that have done some analyzation and has done some records and documentation of Black deaf, but not much. And also, there hasn't been enough recognition on certain vocabulary and certain signs that are definitely different. So you really have to look at more from the linguistics aspects and really analyze that data to see why is it one-handed preferred than two-handed signs. So those different specificities, we need to research more. And there's some free resources that discuss that there. Next slide, please. So the story, when you see a certain words, and you see the sign, sometimes you make that connection, you can understand why that sign is. Some signs are very standard. For example, we have 3 pictures here. And for example, the state of North Carolina, okay? The team that I worked with on this project, when we spoke and filmed different people in North Carolina, we asked them, your school, when you socialized with certain people in your school, we asked them for different signs. And this particular sign was their sign for the term science, going through the fingers. That's there in North Carolina. The Black deaf community and the Black deaf signers from back in the day used that sign for science. And then you have another one, the second picture, the word towel. Towel, that's their sign for towel, which is different than what we use today. And Black deaf people in the past in segregated schools used this sign for towel. You have to catch different instances. Georgia, the state of Georgia used that sign for towel near their elbow. Thirdly, bathroom. As you can see, this is a typical sign for bathroom, but in North Carolina, their sign for bathroom was here on the chest. And if you were in a state like Virginia, their sign for bathroom was here on the mouth. Texas, their sign was here swiping the chest with the W. So there were different signs that made sense, but why are all their signs different at different schools in different locations? Are they moving around? Are they exchanging signs? No, they were siloed in their states, but that made sense for each individual institution. Next slide, please.
We're gonna do an interpreter switch.
Okay.
Now, oh, okay. I'm sure you may be thinking to yourself, well, why are there these variations? Why is it not standard? The language variation is natural. This occurs in day-to-day society. Throughout the world, we have differences, and some may be based on where you lived, the geography or region. It may also be based on who you socialize with, your socialization background. That has an influence as well. A clear example is race. The Black community interacts specifically with the Black community. And so the language that's developed, that also goes for religion as well, if you have different political views. So it's very similar throughout the country how your language is used, and it's based around how you identify and just a number of different factors. Your socialization background connects to the system at large, and more often than not, that keeps folks separated. Next page, next slide. Now, I wanted to just give a summation of this slide. The signing variations are plentiful. There are specific words for, let's say, the same thing. For example, those who may call a bucket, signed it here. Someone else may call it a pail, but it means the same thing. And that's perfectly fine. Having signs that may be different but mean the same thing is a normal part of language. Often, the difference may be noted in the signs. It may be based on how that person talks, that person interacts. It may even be a state of oppression. Let's say a person has an apartment that's available, and a Black person who's able to speak utilizes their voice and who socializes with Black community may call, and the landlord may say, no apartment available. However, it's proven that the apartment is in fact available. If there's another person to call, and let's say they use their quote unquote white voice, they may be accepted and allowed to book that apartment. And then they show up and obviously they are a person of color. Often it depends on what someone sounds like. Are they able to articulate in a specific way? And that can cause some discrimination. So it is our responsibility, if we are out and we see something happening, specifically discrimination with language, you want to be on the lookout. Next slide. As you can see, there is a timeline displayed here, starting back into the American slavery years, 1619, moving through 1865. Here in America, the institutions for deaf and hard of hearing children, the ideology went along with race and how people were living and their educational levels, their employment levels, their home life, etc. Around 1965, started around, right after the Civil War, there was a new exposure, new ways that those who were African American and in the communities felt to grow. However, the oppression still stand, and there were still segregation laws throughout then. You may move on to the next slide. Now, the key to this slide is for us to discuss intersectionality, or intersectionality. This is how it's signed. I felt it was worthy of a discussion here because we can't just talk solely about race. We have to talk about the other factors that is included within the Black ASL project itself. Of course, it is focusing on Black deaf people, language, how language is being used, how it is matched to the situation and environment. But you see some of the points here. I'll give you one moment. Go ahead and click. There we go. So this definition that has just shown, intersectionality does have such different meanings. Your identity. I'm not just Black, I am Black and a woman. There's so many different identities that you can identify with, which is very, very true. Each of those identities still can be within that system of oppression. For example, myself, I'm a Black. Okay, my apologies. The interpreter was muted. So we'll go ahead and continue. Okay, sorry about that little technical difficulty. As I was saying, I am a Black deaf man. I am highly educated. I have a PhD and so many other aspects that makes me me. I have a friend who's a Black deaf woman. Now, we are both Black and deaf. However, with this friend being a woman or perceived as a woman, if we are in a meeting or something along those lines, her thoughts may not be as valued. Now, if I say maybe the same thing, I'll be praised. We're both Black, we're both deaf. However, that additional identity truly changes how we experience life and how we navigate through the system on a day-to-day basis. It's not just who you are solely, it is layered, and we have to take advantage and take note of that. Moving forward, next slide. There we go. Now, I wanted to also define racism for clarity purposes. We see often reverse racism, meaning a Black person was discriminated against a white person, perhaps. Well, yes, it could be discrimination. Yes, could be biases. That is true. But racism, the system of discrimination is based on who has the power. And who has the power is determined by the system. And the activities to ensure non-advancement, to leave out people of color, to highlight those who are in the majority, there's a difference. Do we view that Black people have the power to truly oppress others? No. Racist, that's a little bit of a different word. Often we see a person say your action against someone can be hurtful. They may deem that as racist. It of course, it's awful to be treating someone inappropriately, but the structure and the system is really what defines racism. This has been set for many, many years, and the system has been growing and operating in this manner. A lot of it you don't even notice. General public and policies, the institutions, cultural representation. It can be anything. Let's say shampoo. You know, if you have a specific type of hair, you may not be able to find what you're looking for. You may have to go to a specialty store. Whereas, let's say a white person may be able to go and have an entire row full of shampoos, whereas others would not. Moving on to the next slide. One of the largest movements of our day, the civil rights movement, which was just a fight to try and get equality in housing and education. Everyone who's labeled as an American should have these rights. That's pretty simple. But there's a huge group that felt, no, you need to go back home. And that's where a lot of the actual war of the civil rights movement came from. Even through now, the messaging is a bit different. Black Lives Matter has shown up. Blue Lives Matter has shown up. But truly, foundationally, it's the same thing. It's a push away from equity. Things that have happened back in the past, they are still continuing today, to this day. The ideology has been set, and the system continues to run based on that ideology. Moving forward. Now you see the yellow box, and that actually coincides with the timeline. So it's continued through the 50s, obviously, but you see a little different colors, and you see red. So that was redlining. There were Black families who wanted to purchase property. They wanted to buy their own home. And they wanted to have something to leave to their kids, to ensure they're in a good neighborhood. They wanted to move and, you know, be supported. However, they were told that there were no available properties. There was no place that they could buy in this area. They truly pushed all of those people of color out of those areas and allowed only white families to live there. They created these pockets of segregated areas, a Black area, a white area, and that actually infected generational wealth, because having a house allows you to continue to keep the funding within yourself, whereas a Black family not being able to purchase, especially in the desirable areas, calls for a greater struggle. So the generational wealth of those who were systematically privileged grew, while those who were not continued to stay minuscule. Next page. So we talked about racism. Now let's move on to autism. Autism is a system oppression based on hearing status. So for deaf and hard of hearing people, you can't hear, so you are now being oppressed because of that. As you can see here at the bottom, it shows the educational levels, less than high school, all the way up to a PhD, a master's degree and a PhD towards the end. There's two different lines. The lighter green is for hearing people, and the darker green is for deaf people. As you can see, the deaf line is progressively lower there than the hearing line. And there's a number of hearing people that still feel that deaf people are not able to accomplish those levels of success when it comes to education. Okay, moving on.
Switching interpreters. So again, this really persists, and it goes into education and how one supports oral and how one group supports sign language. And deaf people think, of course, you know, deaf people need sign language to communicate, to understand each other. But other people really swayed away from that. No, no signing. You will be labeled as strange or odd. You need to be like hearing people. So that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to teach you how to talk. We're going to teach you how to speak. And they forced those deaf people to work towards speaking. And that was in the 19th century up until they really still do it today. And you really see in a lot of different photographs, one from last year at an oral school, they had a lot of cute children. They were deaf children with their masks on, of course, because of COVID. But the school was a school that really forced them to wear hearing aids or influence cochlear implants, and even with the teachers and staff. So we don't really do that with hearing children when you think about it. So why are you forcing that upon deaf children, those, you know, that need just the language access? But this is still happening today. Next slide. Okay, so now before 1865, there were some schools that were set up in the country. The first school was in 1817. And then you have 1851 and moving forward, 1865. Now understand the northern states and some of the western states that were being developed, they had schools for deaf children. There were no laws against that. But racism was still there. Just because you're on the West Coast, no, there were still a lot of oppression and oppressed people, but some of the schools, they allowed them to attend. Now, understanding in the southern states, they did not allow Black kids in the school with white students. So at that time, there was still slavery happening. So they were not interested in encouraging and teaching Black students. They were considered property. Next slide. So now, before I showed you, we have that red column. Those were Black deaf children going to white residential areas, and some of them that could not. And you see some of the white residential schools on the right in this column. So, but now more schools were being established, deaf schools for deaf Black children, which means that they had to provide the needs for education differently than the segregation. in the schools through those years. 1868 and also 1972, along those years, through those years, there were segregation that happened for a long time where there was no interaction. White students and Black students stayed separate and lived separate and operated separate. That happened for a good 70 or plus years. And that had an effect on the language development being segregated. And after 1964, 1965, when the Supreme Court, Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, understanding that 1964, there was still a resistance with integrating schools. They tried to force integration, and they felt that that would have an effect on money and their economic wealth. Next slide, please. So now this really continued in 20 or some odd states that were late in integration, 1978 or so. That was about 42, 43 years ago, which is not that long ago when you think about it. And reason being, why did they want to integrate? Well, the point is, their goal was to continue segregation. But what happened to the Black deaf students during that time? So you can see some of the stories coming up in the presentation. Next slide, please. So now we're here during this time after 1964 in the 20th century in a book called Black and Deaf in America. Are we really that different? Came out in 1973, and there was a chapter that talked about Black deaf people and how when they get together, the signing is different, and how the Blacks and Black families and Black friends and the Black community, how they had a distinctive sign that was noticeable, which means that this was a true thing that was happening. Next slide, please. So we have that, plus we have other studies that we have noticed and made observations. So we decided to do our own study. So I remember showing a graph which was about 17 institutes for Black deaf students, 17. So the team and I went to 5 of those. No, excuse me, we decided to do six states. Now, each of the states that we went to, we had different groups. We had a 55 and over group because they experienced segregation. And then we had students 35 and younger that were introduced to the mainstream school integration. Next slide, please. So now I'm sure everyone is motivated to see some examples. Now, with this group of people from Texas, they're from Texas, they're talking about 3 different signs that they use. Now, this is important. This is really important. The first sign, chicken, and bathroom, and important. These 3 words. Next slide, please. Important, chicken, and bathroom. Next slide.
Would you like me to play it?
Yes, play the video, please.
Can you remember the signs we used back at the BDO school?
Yeah, some.
No, the
BDO?
signs we used at BDO.
Yeah, what about this one?
Right.
Do you remember this one?
Right.
That's the sign for important.
Right. How about this one?
Yeah, that one's chicken.
That was chicken. That's right.
Okay. All right, chicken.
He doesn't remember.
Chicken.
He's forgotten. What about
That was
this
chicken.
one?
Hey, how about the sign for restroom? Remember the old sign for restroom?
A sign like this. Or what about this one?
Right. That's it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. For
Okay,
restroom.
like this.
Wow.
Like
that was
this.
it.
Yeah, I remember.
Signs from back in the day.
I
No, it's
remember.
sign like this.
Right, right.
I can't
That's how you sign
believe
it.
he forgot. He can't remember those old signs.
Those old
What made you
signs.
change your way of signing? What happened?
I don't know
Being
how
out
I
in the
forgot.
world.
Well, you
But I just
learned
learned
it.
it from the
Just
children.
being out in the world and doing what you see others do.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide.
Can you remember the signs we used back at the BDOs?
So this is another group, and they're from Louisiana. And this was about some signs incorporated with the days of the week. You know, we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. Now, understand they use numbers to represent the days of the week, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which was really interesting to see how they signed these days of the week. Play the video, please.
Let's talk about
what
it.
they
Let's
used to
just move
sign
on.
back
How about the
then.
sign for church? What did you use for church? What sign did you use?
Church?
I used that
Remember
one.
this one?
Both hands together like you were praying?
Right, church was on Sunday. How about the signs for Monday through Friday? Do you remember those? I remember signing Monday, followed by Tuesday,
Mhm.
then Wednesday,
Well, you were.
Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That was it.
Mhm.
We really got excited. Remember those signs?
Mm-hmm.
You probably
I
don't.
remember.
Well, you were younger.
Yeah, but you were
Oh.
only there briefly, and then you left. But I remember the signs clearly. Monday, then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
You got
Friday.
excited about
and
Friday.
We were happy, and we couldn't wait till Saturday, then back to church on Sunday.
Next slide. So now we move to the younger generation, and these are 35-year-olds and younger, and you can see them signing here. And here we're discussing two signs: the term "my bad," you know, which means my mistake. I'm sorry, I apologize. And another sign is for the word "tight," a term that people use. It means cool, or you dress really nicely. You have a bravado about you. Play the video, please.
You've said there's a difference between the ways of signing. Of course, Black signers show more attitude, have their own style. For example, with my bad. Black deaf sounded like this. My bad.
Right,
Oh,
my
like
bad.
this?
Or you can use two hands.
Yeah,
You know,
my
like
bad.
in
That's
basketball when you foul someone. Oh, my bad.
Right, my bad.
Right.
Or white people may sign it like this.
Or they may say, my mistake.
Yeah,
sorry,
like
my
a mistake,
mistake.
my bad.
Instead of sorry, I pushed
Instead
you,
of my bad.
That's true.
Right.
But you know what? Also, white people may sign, he looks nice, but Black signers will say, he looks tight. Totally different sign.
Right.
He's tight. You know, sometimes we'll use our own sign for the concept of dressing sharp or tight, and people ask, well, what one word do you put with that sign? But
We make it
there
work.
really isn't
Right.
one word that perfectly fits that sign. It's just not one word, you know? It's just like they look
Mhm.
tight, they look smooth, nice.
Yeah, you're right. There's no
Mhm.
one word.
And there's one more. So now the sign Black in America, the film, Signing Black in America, the film, as we discussed, that is on YouTube now. If you click Black ASL resources on my page, which I provided in the chat, it'll lead you to this documentary. So this clip shows a group of young people and their signs. And as we were able to see here, go ahead and play this video.
My favorite one, anytime someone says something stupid, I'm like, boy, bye. I don't want to hear that. I ain't got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. That's another one. I really like using that one. Ain't nobody got time for that.
I'm with the Black LGBT community being fierce. Baby, you fierce. You know, I look at that. Sometimes I see that.
Well, I have to add the hand snaps too. You got to add that. Ooh, you are fierce. But then you got to snap those fingers too. You have to throw that in. That's what really makes Black ASL different from standardized forms of ASL. It's like kicking it up a notch, but not only saying the word fierce, but adding body language, hand snaps, pursed lips, and the head tilt. It's not like we're even trying to do it. It's just in us, and the features are shown naturally.
Next slide.
My favorite one.
So, as I mentioned before, when we were doing this work in 2011, it was in the beginning. It has work that has been done before that, before we did our research. When you go back to 1965, there was an essay that was written by a Black deaf person about signing in the South, and really studied the structure and did some analysis about the 70s. So a little bit of work has been done over the years. Now, during that time, was it really widespread and really researched heavily? No, it wasn't. It wasn't until about 50, 60 years later that we have a lot more attention on it. But this explains previously about different signs and that compared to oral and the oppression of the language and the impact from people being deprived from that language overall. And this was about 1913. Some felt that ASL would go away. So people tried to film ASL to preserve it. A lot of time with the Black deaf community, they disregarded them. In 1965, they had more research that has been documented and published. Next slide, please.
We're going to do an interpreter switch. All right, the previous studies as shown were done, and we decided to repeat those studies to see if similar trends would show up. And they have. So the one hand versus two-handed, as you see here for the signs. For example, have. Have can be done with two hands or one hand. Not a significant change between the signs. Or the cow. Cow can be done with two hands or one hand. Cat, two hands or one hand. Now, with the Black deaf community, typically two hands are used more often than the one hand that's used in the white community. Another is the forehead location. Signs for like no, or what for, or black, or because. We've seen lowered down to the cheek. No, why? So a bit of a drop from the location. Black deaf people, no matter the age, older, younger, they typically kept it higher. Now, it wasn't 100%. However, it was typical from our studies that it had been higher. For white deaf, it's about half and half. Signing space, the amount of signing space. Black deaf people, typically a bit larger. Previous studies show that this was true, that Black deaf people did sign much larger regardless of age, just a lot more expressive. However, white deaf people, the older generation typically stayed within the box, and the younger generation of white deaf people actually started signing a bit larger. So we think that it's based upon education, because if you recall, at that time, it was kind of shunned upon for using signing space larger. It had to be smaller and polite. So a lot of the older people had that lesson, but now it's more accepting. So you're able to sign larger and express yourself. So we think that may be a basis for the reason. Like I said, amount of mouthing, repetition. I know versus I know. So we do see repetition pretty often. Deaf people do use that, but it's a little bit different when it's used for emphasis or if it's used to relate. The reason behind the use of repetition, we need to dig into just a bit more. Culturally, or role shifting, it's a bit of a mix. It's not truly clear. There is something there, but exactly what, it's not specified. The use of mouth movements and morphemes, if it is steady or if it's used, if you are not using your voice to express as well as using the sign. So we do see the use of lips depending on the environment, but some older, we do not see more of a straight face for them. And of course, if you're using African-American English into the signing space, you do see more of the mouth morphemes, and you've noticed that in the film. There is a new study that is specifically with the rhythm of phrases in speech and how it's produced and the vocal intonation that you may hear when someone talks and how it's broken down into their sentences. This is relatively new, and you can even see it with sign. If it's faster or slower, eyebrows raised. So I wonder if the Black spoken in signs were different than the white spoken in signs. Looking more at the language itself, including age, gender, do either of these play a factor? So if there's a Black man, they may sign specifically compared to an older white woman. It may look different. However, it may be a small number. We have to really increase the research to really get a good picture of the need. Now we're going to go back to intersectionality that we talked about before. I am emphasizing this because it's important. Earnings per dollar, comparing white deaf people, those who are biracial, excuse me, the value of money, as you can see, it goes down. Earning the most is those who are systematically privileged, and the system truly does discriminate and undervalue many of those other groups and their contribution to the world at large. And it's also based around education as well. Moving on. Now I have another clip. This is from Signing Black in America, the documentary. One of our co-authors is in the film, and she mentions her experience when she was a small child in a segregated school. So let's enjoy this film. Go ahead and play.
I went
You can click, there you go.
Negro deaf. And my experience there when I went to the school, it was actually the first time I learned sign language. I was 12 years old at the time. And I did not know that that was Black ASL. I didn't know. I was learning sign language. And then I moved to the school for white deaf students after integration, and I couldn't understand the teachers. The group of Black deaf students together, we were lost in the classroom, and we didn't understand why. And so it took us time for us to pick up how white deaf people sign. There was a breakdown in communication, and that continued because it made the Black deaf students feel less than, and that the white deaf students had better language, they had the better books, they had the better resources and schools and exposure. I started to pick up their signs because I thought white was right, white was better, white was smart. I felt embarrassed with my signs. So I put my signs aside. I picked up their signs from socializing with the white students. But later, my Black friends said, "You sign differently." I said, "What?" "You sign like white people." I said, "Oh, I don't want to sign that way. I want to keep my Black signs." I didn't realize what was happening. Later, I learned code switching.
As you can see, if you do watch the entire film of Signing Black in America, it's actually within my resource page. You can view that if you click on the link in the chat. It will take you directly to that documentary and you'll be able to watch it. It's about a half hour long. Now, our Black ASL project interviews, we did go through and interview a number of people, and we heard reoccurring themes that the white education was better. Because their education was better, that means their signs were better. And my local Black signs, it has to be not as good, so I need to learn theirs. So the value for the Black signs wasn't there. So they followed the white is right mentality and went with the majority signs, and we see that prominent today. Moving on. Now, this is a younger group from Texas, and they're going to be chatting. There's a little bit more positive how they explain the difference between Black ASL and the generalized or the white ASL. Let's take a look. You can hit play.
Absolutely.
Can you explain the difference?
Well, I think, and this is just my opinion, I think Black people sign with more rhythm, more style, using words that reveal our emotions, more free flowing. We match the
Right.
flavor. Now, I mean, no offense to white people, but their signs lack affect. There's no tone. It's robotic like signing that shows no emotion.
No tone, right?
Right, meaning plain vanilla, not animated, not fun to watch. Blacks obviously have flavor. We sign excuse me, enhanced by our expression, finger snapping, chicken necking. They're more reserved, concerned for, or considerate of others. Black people aren't feeling that. The way I sign is who I am, my identity. In my opinion, there are two diverse ways of signing. Black signers use Ebonic language like you use, holla. Do whites have theirs? I don't know. That's an example.
Okay, to add to that, of course, we sign with attitude, okay?
We have to. We can't hold back.
Right. I mean, we show our emotion like, what? Can't go there, or I ain't going there. That's just us. White signers, they sign with a more reserved presentation. They may say something like, I don't want to go. Where a Black signer might say, nah, I ain't going there. And that's influenced by Black culture.
It's not only culture, it's also based on our individuality.
Click. Go ahead and click. Oh, wait, no, go back. Go back. Click. Okay, there we go. So the comments that you saw compared to the previous comments about the white signing being better, we see that the tables have turned. We see that there's pride and there's a notice of the style and the attitude and the culture that come along with the Black signs. It's not more of a comparison of better, it's just a difference. The younger generations, they may have those who they feel comfortable and similar with and not see anything as a negative. It's more normal. Moving on. Now, the future. What does it mean for the future? I presented this 2 years ago and I had no idea what today would look like. So I presented about the future and the future is now happening. So we have people, if you happen to have a TikTok or know what it is, there's been a boom of Black deaf signers and attention from the Black school, this one specifically for the school in Texas, and people have just drawn to it and the information has spread. The curiosity about Black ASL has grown and now they're finding more and more about our work and our research. The interest for our project has grown significantly in comparison to what it was. I mentioned about Black ASL and Black signing, I want to say like starting, back in 1965, but now the explosion has happened with attention. The interest is there and that's really great. Move on to the next slide. So what do we know? We know that there is a separate language that is based culturally on signs and discussions that have happened. It comes from social factors, for example, race is one of the identifying factors, region as well, if there was a segregated school in the area. And the linguistic features are still changing, and they are being influenced by so much of the culture and it's spreading from one end to the other. Mainstream programs, for example, way back when deaf schools were prominent, the school was more of the support system for school, and then sometimes the teachers didn't know what was going on. But now the doors have truly opened and the spread, the resources are there, there are laws there, no child left behind. If there's some support that's needed locally, that's done, and the use of the actual deaf institutions are going down. However, we will continue to see language access throughout the world. Now, what we don't know. So we have done some studies down in the South. We've been able to do the research, but none for the North or the Midwest or the West or even Canada. We do know that there are people through the Great Migration that moved from the South who weren't able to find jobs to the North. So of course the Black deaf people followed as well. So we would want to see more about the information of what their life and their sign look like. Right now with Black deaf children, what are their signs looking like? Is it different since they're not going to those institutions or the deaf schools? Are their signs different? I know that they are, but how are the teachers really addressing them? Are they supporting them? Are they leaving them behind? Black ASL, we do know that it is based on many factors, how you're showing your personality, what your communication goal is for that moment. There's just so many studies that can be done. We do have studies about register, but what about prayer or church services? There are specific signs that are used there compared to just general communication. So there's just a laundry list of things that have not been studied that could potentially be studied. Moving on, and we're going to do an interpreter switch.
So, as we're able to see a lot of things still, but we have the message that we emphasize about Black ASL and the value and the worth. It has worth. And I think that film really says everything. So when you watch that film, you can see the message. Next slide.
Black ASL is beautiful. And it's rich in terms of our culture, our history behind the reasons it developed, and it's something that we hold to be very precious to us. I would say that I have a sense of pride with Black ASL. We have our own language. Of course, other cultures have their own language. Black people who can hear have their culture and language. I feel a sense of pride that we have our own culture and language with Black ASL. I want people to recognize this, that this is what we live for, to share our story and to show that our experience is valid. We can't keep denying it. What my parents had to go through, I go through it as well, but in a different way. It's soul, it's unity, there's history, there's culture. All of that is encapsulated into this thing that we call Black ASL. And that's the power of it. And I believe that we need to teach that and continue it every day. It's like we somehow are able to make it through everything that goes on. Language is an expression of being able to make it through all of that and understanding our values, our culture. Black ASL really incorporates all of that. And when you understand Black ASL, you see us.
Next slide, please. I think it's really important to recognize and thank two foundations that really gave us support, the Spencer's Foundation and the National Science Foundation. I really want to thank those two foundations, and for them and the team over there, and also North Carolina State University, their team with the Language and Life program. The Language and Life project that really helped us film the variations of English, but also then now they incorporated sign language. So thank you so much for making that happen and helping this film be so widespread. And also I want to thank the Black deaf community. Without them, we can't make this project. This is their story. So I really want to thank the Black deaf community. And I want to thank everyone involved. And there's also resources provided. Next slide. So this, if you would like to contact me, I have my contact information here, my website, feel free. There's a code there that you can capture take a picture of it, take you to my website, and I provided that link in the chat. Thank you so much for this presentation, allowing me to be here. Is there anybody wanted to add anything? Are there any questions? Sure, I see a question there. Okay, she says, I'm deaf, and she signs. How many variations in linguistic sign language relates to American Sign Language? I think, is that a question? How much variation is there cross-linguistically in sign language with respect to signing space? Well, really, I feel that sign language basically compared with the younger generation in that group. There's a separation in signing space. Some sign in normal space, but previously with the older generation, you can see that drastic difference. And I think at that time, with the oralism and the force of that within a lot of deaf communities and the deprivation of sign language, and around 1880 and since, that has been widespread within a lot of deaf institutes to force that sense of oralism and ban sign language. In a way, many deaf children were punished and oftentimes beat for the use of sign language. So they hid their sign language in secret. A lot of deaf Black institutes, the oralism policy was not enforced because they didn't care about the Black deaf kids. They didn't care whether they spoke or signed. So in a way, ironically, I felt that what was considered normal or second class with the Blacks, it was really fortunate because it really allowed the Black deaf students to continue their signs. And you notice the difference in the way the older white signers sign compared to the older Black signers. You notice the difference. Now understand, the younger generation grew up signing, both white and Black.
Let's do this. I'll read questions from the chat so that you're not having to do both. And if anyone has a question you'd like to sign, you can just write question in the chat and then I'll call on you to sign it yourself. Does that sound okay, Dr. Hill?
Sounds good. Sounds good to me.
Okay. So, are Black ASL signers usually aware of other varieties of Black ASL, both temporal and geographical? If so, how do they learn about them and how do translators deal with it?
Well, now with Black ASL and Black signers, different variations, it depends on their contact network, their community. If they are, if they travel, you're often able to recognize that movement if they're mobile. But if you're stationary in a certain state and you're not traveling much, you may not be abreast of what's happening in other states. But it depends on your network and that network of language. So now with interpreters, that's a different story. I know in the past, interpreters sometimes usually know what's happening locally in their community. But for example, if you're not working in a VRS service, a video relay service, for example, you get so many calls from so many different states throughout the world. So you're able to, as an interpreter, you have to really work towards catching those nuances in different states. But overall, you're able to understand the context. But if you don't understand it, sometimes it's like, wait, what did you say? Okay, I have to learn that sign. So that really helps to understand the signs and nuances in different parts of the country.
Thanks. Okay, quick signed question.
I'm deaf. She says, I'm deaf. Okay. Yes. For Maria. Okay, Maria says, okay. Maria says, I can see you. It's small, but I'm gonna keep going. Come on. The box is small. She says, okay, that's fine. Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate your presentation. Wow. As I'm looking at this, I really didn't realize that Black ASL in the signings, where this really helps me understand. I can show this in the variety. And I didn't realize that this was actually, Black ASL. So wow, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. I do have a question. Now this is related to Through Black Deaf Eyes, the film. And you mentioned that you spoke about the Black community and the science there. Now, are there any updates to include even things that you may have captured or videotaped with segregation? Did they film any of that happening back in the day, or will they update that? Joseph speaks. Now, the film History Through Deaf Eyes, I'm not quite sure the plans they have to add anything to that film. I don't know. But I think the team has a different team at this point. So the team is different, but that may be one reason why we're doing this work. We have to be making this documentary to really add upon that. And I think that the link that I shared in the chat, and also on my webpage, you can click there and you can see at the top, there's a documentary. And there's some video footage that really focuses on all, and it includes a lot more schools. It has a lot more in depth and speaks about the culture and interpreting. And so that's that. And not just that, we also have a book. The book is called Hidden Treasures of Black ASL. And in the book, they have a YouTube film that links to the book. You can use that also as a resource. Maria says that is on your website. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. I'll definitely look on that. I just wanted to make sure that I have something for my students to watch, not only Through Deaf Eyes, but also I want to include your work as well, because I definitely would show this to my class Through Deaf Eyes, but I didn't feel that film was enough. I needed more of, actual information. Thank you. And I have one more question, if I can. Okay, so you talked about, you mentioned that it was hard to see, but they mentioned their signs for the week, Monday through Friday, back in the day at the Black Deaf residential schools, that clip that you showed. Do you mind talking more about that? Joseph says, yes, that group was based in Louisiana, and other states had similar experiences. This was not just alone with Louisiana, but the numbers that they used to represent the days of the week. Monday was number 5. Why? Because you usually count down from Monday. So you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What is it? Friday. Friday was this with one finger. And then Saturday was both fists. And then we were excited because school, and Sunday was the prayer hands for church. Yeah, that makes sense. That's so clear now that you show that visual. Wow, what? Okay, cool. Thank you, thank you. Cool, no problem. Hello, is this Pamela? Pamela says, hello, I teach as well. And I'm curious to know that, with Black people, there's so much about our history that we never know and that they don't teach us and haven't taught us. So in the future, there's plans to teach the development within the curriculums to teach Black deaf children about Black deaf ASL. Joseph says, yes. Yes, I do agree that that is often the case, and I often get that question to develop a curriculum. But yes, that's definitely possible, and there's definitely a need for that. So understanding now, in the past, in the fall, This past fall at Gallaudet University, we established a Center on Black Deaf Studies. Woo, Pamela says, which really works to prepare a curriculum. So we're working on that. So that's in the works. We just recently opened that up this year, a few months ago. So we're still hiring people and developing our program. But that takes a while to get into gear. But that's why, again, we emphasize the need. And again, on my page, we have some more resources that really expands upon that. And if needed, you can use those resources for teaching for now. And but for the future, of course, we're going to create more, because there's definitely more of an interest. And before there was an interest a little bit, but it builds and it dies down. But this year it has been building like wildfire. And I think it's really interesting that it's in so much of a high demand, but really helps us produce more resources for the people that really want the information. Perfect. Thank you, Pamela says. I really look forward to that. Joseph says, thank you.
Okay, so the next written question in the chat says, it's a small clarification. You mentioned the lowering of signs. Which group tends to lower signs, Black or white signers?
And we're going to do an interpreter switch. And Joseph is saying, well, let me go back. All right, so we done, there we go. We've done an interpreter switch. All righty. Now, the Black deaf signers typically keep it higher on the head. So normally, the signs that you would use on your forehead, if you look at the ASL dictionary, the sign for no is signed on the forehead. The sign for 4 or Y, they're all typically based around the forehead. That is common. And Black deaf people use those signs higher. Maybe not 100%, but they do. Often, you may see, for example, there's a man in Arkansas, I think. He would have a hat. And so he would sign no, but when he's signing, he would sign a little bit lower. Excuse me, he would sign all the way on top of the hat because he was emphasizing that he knew. The white deaf group, based on our videos and the evidence collected, now this is not everyone, but it seemed about half and half within that group would sign no towards the chin compared to no on the forehead. So there's language processes that influence where signs are signed and why they're signed as they are, a little bit lower. For example, mother, and then mother, no towards the forehead. If you're chatting, it's easier to sign it lower. And then father and no, both on the forehead. So it's easier to sign that way. So location can play in part as to what you're chatting about. Also, different stylistic signs, and the language itself is not lazy, but it's influenced by many different factors. Black deaf typically will sign higher. You may see no on the chin, cheek, but more often than not, it's on the forehead. And Maria is saying it's based on register, and Dr. Joseph is saying yes, the register, it could be. Depending on that group that's signing, if they're just chatting, typically it's still on top of the forehead for Black deaf communities.
Okay, so the next question in the chat is from MJ, who says, what is the role of Black hearing scholars who want to work alongside Black deaf scholars / leaders while confronting generations of autist practices in Black hearing communities?
Well, I would say this is a start because for me, I'm not sure if you know, but I'm the only Black deaf linguist with a PhD in America. It's just me. So other Black deaf, there's one that's on the way, just started a master's degree, but it's going to take a while for her to get there. And will she be able to quote unquote catch up? It's going to be 7 to 10 years before that. Now, Carolyn McCaskill, Dr. Carolyn McCaskill, she's more based on cultural studies, but not linguists. So that's a little bit different course of study. So it's important that the study of language and culture, while they're different, they are connected. And the numbers are relatively small for those of us that do study. I happen to love reading and working with Black hearing scholars. I think they're more aware of their relationship and how they play a part in autism. For example, for me, I'll go to a linguistic conference. It's an annual conference. I go every year since I was a PhD student. So maybe I'd say the last 10 years or so, I'll go annually every year. There's quite a few people there who know me. And it was not until the film, the documentary that just came out, then they came up to me and wanted to chat. Silence before this film was distributed. I would often have interpreters with me to interpret, to ensure access. They're there, ready to go, but there wasn't so many people who were willing to come up to me to chat. But I noticed that the interpreters were often white. So they may not have fit in the best. You know, we go to dinner and that kind of influenced the socialized portion of it. You know, it's not fully open, fully welcome because they're kind of outsiders. I noticed that if I happen to have Black interpreters, things work a lot differently. I'm able to really interact. So we still have to be aware of their biases in relation to the people and truly understand the impact that it may have on those that we're working with. Now, confronting that biases, it's best to see how best to collaborate. I'm sure a lot of their work can very easily be collaborated with the studies that we're doing, mostly related to facial expressions, maybe gesture, even history related to school in general, even the psychology of learning and education of those who are Black and brown. Definitely we could collaborate, but we have to have that open door and we have to figure out how we can include Black ASL, Black materials, or truly any Black deaf research or studies based around education, health disparities, etc., to open up the doors and open up the eyes. Because as of right now, the number of Black deaf people in America who sign, who are able to do these things are relatively low. Those who have knowledge of psychology and how it's truly impacted Black deaf people throughout the years, most people don't truly know. So we need to change that and get more inclusive so that our numbers can go up. Maria says, I have a question relating to requesting the interpreters. For example, like you said, I have 2 Black interpreters for you today, and I've requested to have specific interpreters because they are able to voice like me. They have the culture that I identify with, Spanish culture, Mexican myself. I am Latina. And so that is how I identify, and I like to have interpreters that identify similar to me. I've requested, however, my work would say, no, you cannot ask for a specific preference because of discrimination. And they do not want to discriminate against interpreters. Do you agree with that? Well, I would say no, that's not discrimination. Discrimination is based on skin color, Really, you are requesting an accommodation for your needs. With cultural, history, linguistics, you can request for a fitting interpreter. I think maybe a different way to phrase it would help. For example, this client matches my needs. You could very easily type and say, not necessarily race, you could say culturally, I need someone who's able to recognize these cultural linguistic features as I present. And this person or that person may not qualify due to them not understanding this or that culture. So I wouldn't necessarily say discrimination. It goes back to the system, as we talked about before, racism and who has the power, who has the control. So I feel that truly it's not discrimination. At least that's my view. Maria saying, that's right. I tried to explain to them this is specifically about the wealth that these interpreters have based around culture. And they said they understood, but they could not because it's considered discrimination or preferential treatment. I tried my darndest to explain. I'm trying to figure out how can we change the system so that they can accommodate us appropriately. I'm still trying to research and figure that out. Dr. Joseph is saying, well, the discussion has to be had. It has to be had with the organization RID, the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. And there's several different organizations that can be involved with as well on how best to truly get the action going to change the system. Really, it's not just the language match, it's a cultural match as well. Thank you so much, Maria says to Dr. Joseph. Okay, we're moving on. So we have Jordan. Jordan says, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with us here today. It's thrilling to see the project. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do more research in the future to get additional data points. Question for you, however, international countries, do they have similar racial disparities that we have? And in the history of segregation with schools, do they have something similar based around segregation in the communities? For a number of different locations, they may have different types of sign language, even in the same location, and the Black communities use different type of languages. Have you studied international or contacted people from other countries to see if there's any parallels? Dr. Joseph says, no. I do know that they have diversity within their skin color. However, their history and their perspective of racism is quite different than what happened here in America. So based on their culture and their access, their location can explain why things happened in their area that may not have happened here. I don't have a wealth of knowledge based around each different location. I do know that South Africa, because they had apartheid and the segregation that was there, I know that they have it, but I'm not as well versed with South Africa as well. I've heard a few things and I can identify a few things, and it is also based on apartheid that they've experienced in their region. And it's not just based on race. There are other countries, for example, Canada and Ireland. Each of them had schools, but their segregation was based on gender. So there's a lot of people that are unfamiliar with this information, that only boys could go to one school and girls to another. So when they came to integrate with one another, they had to learn how to communicate due to difference in signing. Like the female sign became the norm. And so it's just interesting how things progress. And Jordan saying, thank you so much. I'm wondering, with the international countries, some that have had segregation, some that have large Black communities, I wonder if there's a way to compare the two of them. I do know that the context is different internationally, but I'm just curious if the variation is based on multiple factors or something to go along with race. I'd be interested to know. Is this something to think about, maybe international research for the future? It'd be a great opportunity. Dr. Joseph says, yes, we'll see.
All right, so the next question that's in the chat, You also have lots of compliments in the chat, so we'll give you time to read them at the end. Many, many thank yous. The question is, do you know if Black students were taught different signs by Black teachers when schools were segregated? Or did Black ASL develop from the students signing with each other?
Well, for sign language in general, mostly it comes from peer-to-peer interactions. And that's how language transmission is encouraged and spread. Children, would they get their language from? That's a good question. Similar to the deaf schools of our heyday, they may see that teacher shortly in class, but the true interactions are through students. They may learn something in class, pick it up, change it, adjust it. The teacher would have to really stay on them in order to truly change the way that they're signing. For residential schools, it varies. Some states allowed white teachers in the schools, some did not. White teachers were not allowed in many areas. I do know that Black hearing staff who did not know sign would go to an HBCU or historically Black college or university and do like a 12-week course, signing basic skills, and then go and start teaching. 2 weeks, 12 weeks, that's it. Are they truly skilled at that short amount of time? No, but they were able to communicate and do as best as they could. Some other states, they would allow white teachers to go into the deaf schools and teach, for example, in Alabama, but only because at that time, the white deaf school and white deaf students weren't allowed to sign because oralism had started. All the teachers had then been fired and the teachers needed somewhere to work. So they went to the other deaf school and started teaching there. So that's how they end up with white teachers in that area. Now, is this solely because the white teachers needed to influence the language? No, it happened because the deaf school and the deaf school campus, it was so close between the two, same town, maybe 15 minutes apart. So the white teachers would teach at the white deaf school, the Black deaf school, and the white students had oralism. And they would never interact. They would never see one another. So they continued to be segregated.
Switching interpreters.
Sorry. All right, and I'll move myself out of the top corner after I read this question. I'm sorry. Okay. What advice would you have for people interested in studying signing among the Latinx deaf community? What would be a good starting point? For example, gathering testimonies?
Well, with the Black ASL research, I feel as though there's the same problem there. The problem of networking and the people who are interested in this work, who knows the community, who knows the contacts, who knows how to incorporate those to get them onto the project. So yes, you have those factors there, but you do need a person who is an expert linguist, to do this research, who really knows how to analyze this work. So that's the most important part, to identify that factor. Now, you can collect data and preserve and create that documentation and make those descriptions. I think that definitely helps. But to know one person doing that job, hey, you still need more. And with the Latinx community, there's variation there too. So it's not just one thing that you're looking at, there's variation. So I think that it's better to start with, there's a person's name by Nakia Smith, and she created a TikTok video on social media about sign language that has been really widespread and has gone viral. And it's very honest, and she's just sharing the story of her grandfathers and their sign language during that time. So just creating different types of footage in media, even if it is boring. But I think just, again, sharing that and networking that, that's a good way to preserve that language in the culture online. And I think that allows more people to see that and add to that research and collect that. And I think that what we're doing right now, you see more and more videos popping up, and you're seeing more things from the past, and more people are interested. How can they help? How can they add to this? And that can be a lot. Going through all that video, it eats a lot of time, but establishing that network and that sharing network and moving things around, not just necessarily in one place, I think that's perfect and definitely helps creating and documenting that data. And so in deciding how to analyze it.
So sadly, we're at the end of our time. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank our wonderful speaker, Dr. Joseph Hill, and our excellent interpreters. There are many thanks to both of you in the chat.
I can see it.
There are also some additional questions we didn't have a chance to get to, but Dr. Hill provided his email address and Twitter handle, and you can reach out to him. The room will stay open for a few minutes for those of you who sign. If you want to stay and chat, feel free. Those of us who don't sign, the interpreters are at the end of their time, so sorry for the rest of us.